For a huge part of the 20th century, scientists were wrestling with this massive problem. How on earth do you study the mind? This private, inner world of thoughts and feelings. It just seemed totally out of reach for objective, rigorous science. So how did they even begin to try and solve this puzzle?
Well, think about it. Science, at its core, deals with stuff that's out in the open, things you can observe, measure, and verify. We can see people running, we can listen to them talking, we can watch them eat, but we can't actually see a belief, can we? Or a desire, or a feeling. To the scientists of the day, all that internal stuff was like a ghost in the machine, a phantom that had no place in a truly physical science of psychology.
So, the big question was, how could psychology ever become a legit science? Well, along came the philosopher Karl Hempel and his buddies in the Vienna Circle, and they proposed a solution that was frankly radical. It was an audacious plan to get rid of that ghost in the machine once and for all.
Their answer was a theory with breathtaking ambition: hard behaviorism. Hempel's core idea was this: any statement we make about the mind, about thoughts, feelings, you name it, is really just a kind of shorthand. A shorthand for talking about physical states and observable behaviors. So, in his view, psychology wasn't some special, spooky science. It was just another branch of physics, plain and simple.
Now, the philosophical engine driving this whole theory was something called the principle of verification, which came from a school of thought called logical positivism. The rule is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. For any statement to have meaning, there has to be some way, at least in theory, to check if it's true, to empirically verify it. If you can't test it, it's just meaningless noise. And for Hempel, this was the secret key to making psychology a proper science.
Okay, so to show how this all works in practice, Hempel gave us a classic case study. It's a really simple everyday situation, but it's designed to show how even the most private, subjective feeling can be translated into the cold, hard language of physics. So let's meet Paul. Paul tells us he has a toothache. Now, to you and me, that's a statement about a feeling of pain happening inside his head. But for a hard behaviorist, this is a problem. That inner feeling is a ghost. How can we scientifically verify it? Hempel's answer is pretty mind-bending. He says the statement, "Paul has a toothache," isn't really about an inner feeling at all. He claims it's just a neat little summary of a whole list of observable, physical things that we could, in theory, go and check for ourselves.
And this is where you really see his method in action. That fuzzy mind concept of pain gets translated into 5 concrete physics concepts. 1. We can see Paul weeping and holding his jaw. 2. We can hear him say the words, "I have a toothache." 3. A dentist can look and find a cavity. 4. A doctor can measure his blood pressure and see it's gone up. And 5. A neuroscientist could, in principle, scan his brain and see specific things firing. According to Hempel, the toothache is nothing more than this collection of verifiable facts. The ghost is gone.
Pretty neat, right? A bold, elegant solution. But you know how it goes in science and philosophy. Every theory has to be put to the test. It has to face the firing squad. So let's put hard behaviorism under the philosophical microscope and see if it actually holds up.
All right, here's the first and most obvious objection. What if Paul's just faking it? An actor on a stage, or maybe someone trying to get out of work. If all we have is the behavior, how can a behaviorist ever tell the difference between real pain and someone who's just a really good actor?
Now, Hempel saw this one coming. He had an answer ready. He'd argue that sure, a good actor might be able to fake some of the signs, like crying or saying his tooth hurts, but a truly penetrating examination, one that looks at everything, including what's going on in the central nervous system, would expose the fraud. The physical science just wouldn't all be there.
But philosophy doesn't give up that easily. So let's raise the stakes with a much tougher case. A thought experiment known as the Super Spartan. Imagine a warrior who's been trained since birth to endure incredible pain without showing a single outward sign. They don't cry, they don't even flinch, they can even control their own physiological responses, so their blood pressure stays perfectly normal. And right here, the theory hits a massive brick wall. The Super Spartan is on the inside, feeling excruciating pain. Yet, if we go through Hempel's checklist of verifiable conditions, none of them are met. So the hard behaviorist is forced to conclude that the Spartan is not in pain. And that's a flat-out contradiction. It seems to prove that something essential, that inner feeling, has been completely left out of the equation.
And now for the final killer blow. This one strikes right at the heart of the entire project. Remember that foundational rule, the principle of verification? It says that any meaningful statement must be empirically verifiable. Well, here's the problem. How do you empirically verify the principle of verification itself? The answer is you can't. It's not a scientific fact. It's a philosophical rule you have to accept on faith. So by its own logic, the very principle that underpins the whole theory is rendered meaningless. It's a self-destruct button.
So yeah, hard behaviorism, this incredibly ambitious project to make psychology appear science, it ultimately fails the interrogation. But, in philosophy, a spectacular failure can often be more useful than a quiet success. So what's the big takeaway here? The failure of this theory really forced science and philosophy to go back to the drawing board. It showed that maybe, just maybe, the mind can't be so easily swept under the rug of physics and behavior. And it leaves us with this massive, profound question that we're still grappling with. How can we scientifically explain our inner, subjective consciousness, that ghost in the machine, without giving up on scientific rigor? That, right there, is the challenge that continues to this day.